welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Lindsay Pollock. I'm the provost at Sarasota University. Sarasota is a completely online learning environment developed by and for Montessorians. We offer a bachelor's completion program in Montessori education and master's degrees in Montessori education and Montessori leadership. And I'm delighted to report that July 1st, we are launching our first cohort in our doctoral program, which is also 100% online and focused on Montessori education. And tonight we have with us Ellen Lastinger, our Director of Admissions. Ellen, is there anything you'd like to add? I know we've got lots of applications. Is it too late to apply for our July session, Ellen?
It is getting there, but it is not too late yet. What it does is I just send things over to Miss Lindsay Pollock, who's talking. I just keep sending things her way and telling her to do them.
That's
So
right.
no, we actually still have a couple of weeks, and we're good for any additional applications. I will put information in the chat before we leave, and you can feel free to give me a text or a call or send me an email.
Ellen, you're amazing. So if you're interested in applying for one of our programs and you'd like to start, our next session starts July 1st. And as Ellen said, we're getting down to the wire, but if that's your aspiration, we can make it happen. But please get your applications in right away to our admissions department and watch for that contact information in the chat. So tonight we have with us the amazing Pam Shanks. Pamela Shanks is going to talk to us this evening about discovering how reactive behaviors are patterns of behavior that may interfere with learning and positive social interactions. Tonight, we will discuss how they are alarmingly common in today's classrooms. So, to access strategies that work, even for learners with developmental differences, delays, or disabilities, it's really important that we take time to learn from Pamela tonight and hear her words of wisdom. Pamela Shanks is the author of the Montessori Approach to Classroom-Based Interventions, which introduces the concept of Montessori classroom-based interventions, defining the difference between tantrums and meltdowns, and provides several strategies tonight from her book to help you guide behavior you hope to see. So at this time, Pamela, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we're so excited to hear this very important information.
Well, thanks, Lindsay. That's really kind of you. I just appreciate everyone who's online tonight, taking time out of what I'm sure are very, very busy days for each and every one of you. So let's see if I can get my screen sharing going here. Had it just a minute ago. Okay, everyone able to see those slides?
Yes,
Yes.
looks good.
Great. Okay, if I can just close this, then I think we'll be okay. Well, okay, we'll just get started. So I know that you all understand that the language we use matters. So I want to take a look at a term that is really common among Montessorians, and that's challenging behavior. And honestly, it describes our feelings about behavior, so that makes it really adult-centered. It is a term that is rooted in behaviorism. It's been used for a long time and it's really outdated. The term is also really very subjective. Adults label behavior as challenging based on their personal beliefs and their biases and their tolerances and intolerances. And all those things can be conscious as well as unconscious. And thinking of behavior as challenging leads us to focus on the behavior rather than on the child. It's just not at all aligned with our Montessori beliefs and values. And I believe that as Montessorians, it is time for us to use a term that is a little better aligned with our methodology and our pedagogy. We need a child-centered term that reflects the child's experience. And I believe that reactive behavior is a much more child-centered term. After all, behavioral outbursts are simply reactions to overwhelming feelings and sensations, intense unmet needs or wants. And when we think of behavior as reactive, it reminds us of one really critical piece, and that is that children can only respond with the skills that they have currently mastered,
Mm.
right? It also ties children's reactive behavior into underlying causes, which promotes a perspective shift by adults. And when we begin considering the possible causes of the reaction, then we start asking different questions. And a skill development mindset begins to take over. Observation becomes much more focused on identifying what skills are missing, underdeveloped, the things that need to be taught, and what things need to be supported. So, a skill development mindset requires that the analytical side of our brains begin taking over. And research shows that when,
Canada.
hello,
Huh?
everything okay? Okay. Research shows that when we work from a skill development mindset, that the amount of teaching that goes on actually increases. As our emotions give way to analysis, then our stress is reduced. And with this happens, we are more effective at supporting behavior change. So a skill development mindset means that you can teach by teaching, not by correcting. So, what do we want to teach? Well, let's assume that you have, for a moment, access to a Montessorian with special education experience, someone who is ready and more than willing to work with you and provide you with intervention options for those learners that you're concerned about at the level at which you teach, someone who has over 35 years of experience teaching in an inclusive Montessori environment, who over the years has guided an entire range of learners, including those with mild to severe and profound impacts due to developmental and learning differences and disabilities and neurodivergence, all in a Montessori community with their peers. Assume you had me as part of your team. So those ideal interventions would, of course, be a really good match, not only for the learners that you're concerned about, but also for the classroom community as a whole. So in that chat, see if you can put in a few words that might describe those ideal interventions. What words would describe them? Lindsay, I can't see them from when I'm presenting, so could you read a few out loud for me, maybe?
Absolutely. Let's see what we have coming up. Calm, supportive, another calming,
Mm-hmm. Okay,
interventions based on observation, responsive, data-driven,
good.
inclusive, acknowledgement, child-centered,
I knew I could count on you all to come up with a really robust list. Good for you.
reflections, universally adaptable, inclusive, meaning the student has input.
Excellent. I call those interventions that you just now described Montessori classroom-based interventions. They're the foundation of teaching by teaching. They're those how-to steps of supporting a really broad range of learners. They're small, simple, flexible, research-informed changes to the environment, the material, the presentation, or maybe our teaching style that supports children's use of the materials and importantly, their ability to demonstrate knowledge or skill development while still maintaining fidelity to the Montessori method of education. So let's take a quick look at the 6 ideal characteristics that I use to define Montessori classroom-based interventions. The first is that they have to be simple, and that keeps us all calm, right? You're not going to use them if they're hard, so they need to be easy to understand and use. They certainly need to be flexible so that you can easily adjust or remove them based on a child's responses to the intervention, or maybe extend them and use them longer. You certainly want them to be intentional. We need to select them based on observation, so addressed or known strengths and needs, observed or known strengths and needs. And they certainly need to be focused as well. They need to focus on increasing access to the curriculum, the materials, the social environment, so that they support every child's ability to work, learn, and successfully interact with others in our communities. And they focus also on increasing every learner's ability to demonstrate new knowledge, learning, and skill development. And then, of course, we want them to work. They do need to be research formed, supported by research based in best practice techniques. And finally, most importantly to me, my entire career, is that they need to be Montessori. They need to assure that goal of maintaining an authentic Montessori experience because when children struggle, the Montessori methodology still must remain the driver of what we do and how we do it. So the suggestions I'm going to offer tonight meet those 6 criteria. Research shows that bonding and attachment are key to developing emotional regulation. And building a connection with all children is important, but that effect of a strong teacher child bond is really magnified for children with neurodivergence, developmental and learning differences, disabilities, including those who experience reactive behavior. So, of course, number one has to be to actively work to establish and strengthen bonds by engaging in warm, loving interactions, conveying security, supporting emotional regulation, being available, guiding children who've reached their limits back to engaging in constructive action and interaction. For our infants and toddlers, our youngest learners, feeling secure is the most important. At this age, children naturally are in tune to touch, tone, facial expression, and of course, language. So those warm, close, loving interactions convey security to our littlest learners. And then as children age, support and guidance becomes increasingly important to establishing and maintaining and strengthening that bond. So to teach by teaching, a strong connection with the child is the first and most important thing. So let's take a quick look at the difference between tantrums and meltdowns. These terms are used interchangeably, which kind of drives me crazy. But I get it. They look similar, but they have been for different reasons, and that means they require different responses from the adult and the environment. So I really think it's very important for every teacher out there to be able to recognize the difference between the two. Tantrums happen when children are trying to get something they want or need, or their intentions are misread. When needs, wants, intentions are not satisfied, then the child experiences this big rush of feelings and an episode of reactive behavior, commonly called a tantrum, begins. Big feelings can cause tantrums at any age, but they're most common in our youngest learners, of course. They're usually brief, 10 to 15 minutes or less. The behaviors are less intense, and recovery, therefore, can happen pretty quickly. Big feelings and the tantrums they cause are a normal, healthy part of typical development. After all, what is an infant's main means of getting their needs met? Crying. And if you don't do it quick enough, crying really loudly and harder, right? Toddlers and preschoolers do have more frequent tantrums because they're still learning new ways to communicate. They don't yet have the needed language to express the needs, wants, and intents that they have, and they don't yet have well developed self regulation skills and self control skills needed to control their big feelings and their reactions to those feelings. But as children age and develop, and their executive function skills and their language skills increase, tantrums are going to naturally decrease for most of our learners. And this makes supporting both the development of language and executive function skills critical to helping learners of all ages modulate their big feelings and prevent tantrums no matter their ages, like I said. One telltale sign of a tantrum is that children may look to see if you are watching so they can tell whether or not it's working, right? Tantrums end when children's needs, wants, or intents are satisfied, or they realize that acting out just isn't going to work. So let's go over just a couple of Montessori-based interventions to support children whose big feelings lead to frequent tantrums. First of all, a dose of empathy and then a shift to problem solving may help children reset or completely avoid those big feelings. Empathy shows children that you're on their side. This isn't a standoff, of course. You don't want to have a power struggle. Instead, you want to assure children that you understand the problem and you empathize. Acknowledge what they want without giving in. Be kind but firm. So you do want to eat snack now. I know. I get it. Oh, you are hungry. I understand. you want snack. Maybe for an older child, someone has the research book you need. No kidding. That is so irritating. I can see that's the first thing on your work plan for today. I understand why you are upset, right? Then you're going to add that first then or when then statement. First, go get a book to look at while you're waiting. Then it'll be easier to wait for snack. Or when you see a space, then it's your turn. Or again, for that older child, first let your classmate know that you want the book next. Then choose something else to work on. Look at your plan, and if you still need help choosing something, let me know. I'd be glad to help you. And there are a few magic, or like what I want to call magic pixie dust kind of phrases that help children in the midst of big feelings. These statements of empathetic permission include things like, you can stop crying, you can be all done now. That is often enough to get our youngest children back on the track to calming progress. Let me know when you're ready. Works pretty good with learners of all ages. It gives learners power and control while providing a graceful way out of an episode of big feelings. And with that path out, children often calm more quickly. And remember that number one reason why tantrums end, children realize they aren't going to work. So take away that uncertainty. You can cry if you need to, but I'm not going to change my mind. I understand you can cry if you want to. That acknowledges those emotions while helping children understand that the behavior display isn't going to work. But we have to pay attention to our tone, our body language, and our intent. That deep breath, if you're feeling a little dysregulated yourself, is important because there's a big difference between what I just said and you can cry if you need to, but I will not be changing my mind, right? Your intent and your delivery have to be centered in empathy to work. And yes, for those of you who are wondering, tantrums do sometimes morph into meltdowns. So preventing tantrums also prevents meltdowns. So what is the difference between the two? Well, meltdowns are not about getting needs, wants, or intents satisfied. Meltdowns result instead from a reflexive, automatic, protective response stimulated in the brain. They happen when children are overwhelmed by sensations, by feelings, by emotions, or sensory input from their surroundings. They can happen at any age. They're likely to be quite lengthy, 15 to 45 minutes or more, and the behaviors are going to be a lot more intense. And recovery, therefore, is going to take a long time. This flood of sensation, emotion, or feeling is often called sensory overload. And sensory overload causes a protective response in the brain that results in a meltdown. It causes a too much feeling. Hold on to that phrase for a minute, too much. And it's not something that children can simply turn off. So, as much as we might want to help our learners or help children in the midst of a meltdown, calming needs to happen at their pace, and we likely cannot hurry it along. So, we want to think about the brain's protective response because it's a lot like a circuit breaker during an electrical surge. An electrical circuit breaker is tripped during a surge to protect the panel and the house from fire. And in the same way, when a flood of incoming sensation is too large for the brain to process, sensory overload occurs. A proactive response is activated, and that meltdown begins. And during a meltdown, that too much feeling, remember that? That too much feeling takes over, and the fight, flight, or freeze response is activated. And we can observe children displaying concerning or even dangerous behavior, or they might shut down completely. Remember, sensory overload can happen at any age. So think back to a time when you were completely overwhelmed, so much so that you actually thought or said, I can't deal with this right now. It's just too much. There's that phrase again, too much. Enough so that maybe you began to cry, you walked away, you refused to continue that conversation, or you reacted atypically with a huge burst of anger. That is sensory overload, that too much feeling that you get automatically is your brain's protective response. And you literally cannot deal with the situation because your brain is in a protective mode. And if someone looked at you and said, oh, it's going to be okay, just calm down. Could you do that instantly? And how long did it take you to get past that too much feeling? It certainly doesn't go away quickly. Meltdowns end with fatigue or with a reduction in sensory input so that the child's limbic system calms and the protective reflexive response begins to subside, and the child slowly feels less overwhelmed and recovery begins. Okay. So, for prevention and recovery, one of the things I recommend is creating a calming space within the classroom, a safe, private space to calm. Needs to have a cozy, private feeling so children don't feel as if they're being watched or looked at. That's really important. It needs to be a low sensory environment, so somewhere quiet with less to look at. So, facing a wall or a corner instead of a room or a doorway or a window. Maybe lighting that can be dimmed, a pair of headphones to dim noise, anything you can do to help reduce sensation. Of course, commercial solutions are available, but homemade spaces are also quite easy to create. And older students enjoy collaborating to design a calming space. And in my classroom, this space was available to everyone. And I used a grace and courtesy lesson to help the children understand and to establish the responsibility that came with that use of the space. So if you choose to use that space, you also agree to offer it to children who are in need. And then, of course, you could return later. All right. Any questions or comments? You're welcome to open up your mic and ask any questions about the difference between tantrums or meltdowns or make comments. Again, Lindsay, if there's any comments in the or questions in the chat. Okay. I'm going to assume we're all right then. I'm going to keep going. So let's look at a sample of interventions for reactive behavior that interferes with classroom work, such as inattention and being off task. We always start with observation in Montessori. And so that's where we want to begin. There likely are conditions that help children attend and work. So you want to make sure you're observing to find those. Where can they best attend and work? With whom? What time of day? Before snack? After lunch? What subject or activity? Maybe reading for enjoyment or drawing. The range of conditions are going to be as unique as the children that you teach. But these conditions help us determine things such as when and where to give lessons, who might be good partners, workspaces for subjects that require extra focus, like subjects the child perceives as hard or less preferred. And then as you begin to get a better understanding of the child's attention and work behavior, it's our job to help learners begin to think about their own ability to focus and work and help them begin to identify places, times, and strategies that foster the ability to attend. Helping children to use these strategies and to advocate for what works, of course, are lifelong skills. The goal, of course, is independent use of strategies. However, this goal may be elusive for some of our learners. So, for example, research shows that students with EF differences, executive function differences, and ADHD can keep their workspace organized to the benefit of their ability to finish a work cycle. But consistently implementing strategies is a big issue. They struggle with persistence. So, as the adult, you are the persistence encourager. And you may need to be that for some of our learners for the entire 3-year cycle that they're in your classroom. All right, so here's another chat moment. I want you to look at these pictures of the two children and tell me what you think they're doing.
I see. Lots of people are saying thinking.
Good, good. Absolutely. That's exactly what I was hoping you would say. So this worked out just great. I do think it's interesting that to designate thinking, we're looking away. And
Mm.
looking away is something we all do when we're thinking. And see if you can catch yourself and others doing it this week. If you start watching for it, you're going to see it all the time. And that's because 80% of the information we process daily is visual. And averting
Mhm.
our eyes from a conversation partner or a teacher then reduces the amount of visual input, and with less to process, it's easier for the brain to think. which brings me back to these children. Maybe instead of thinking, they're listening. For
Mm.
some struggling learners, that same tendency to reduce visual input by averting the eyes activates when they're trying to listen. Listening and looking at the same time is not only hard, it may even be impossible. So
Mm.
that makes it critical for us to determine for those learners that we're worried about what listening looks like. Do they make eye contact only when they're listening? Do they make eye contact only when they're speaking? Do they do it all the time? I've seen certainly all three. And looking away is often mistaken for inattention or treated as reactive behavior. But I want you to remember it may indicate that the learner is actually listening harder, right? Children intuitively reduce visual input so that more of the brain's processing power can be devoted to listening. So that request to look at me while I'm talking might actually interfere with a child's ability to listen. So, asking comprehension questions now and then or at the end of a lesson is a better way to determine attending, listening, and understanding than simply relying on eye contact. You also want to observe as you're thinking about children's listening behavior to determine what their response latency might be. And that is how long does it take on average for the child to process and then respond to spoken language? The longest I ever determined was 15 seconds. I mean, now think about that. Me saying something to a child, and 15 seconds later, they begin to do or speak or the things that the instruction that I gave, it was an uncomfortably long wait for me because I am a talker and come from a family of talkers. But if I waited, this little girl often responded successfully. And importantly, if I didn't wait, I could not accurately measure her ability to understand, comprehend, and follow through. That long pause allowed her to successfully process my request and formulate a response and act on that response. And as a skill was mastered, her response latency grew shorter. So it was a way to measure mastery for her. But when working on a new skill, that 15 seconds was required again. For learners of any age, understanding listening behaviors helps reduce episodes of reactive behavior. Because for this little girl and many other learners, if I repeated that prompt again, it started that whole processing loop over again. And eventually, frustration was keyed. All right, so let's talk a little bit about when children understand negation. So look at that image on the screen and see if you can find a child who does not have a train. Pretty easy, right? But a child without complete understanding of negation is going to point to a child with a train every single time. Typically, developing children, or those children who fall within that range, completely understand negation in sentences between 3 and 4 years of age. And it's likely much later for children with developmental delays, identified disabilities, children who are multilingual learners. And I know that feels kind of late, but it's true because negation comes in so many forms. Just because a child can follow a negative command or instruction in one situation doesn't mean that they're going to successfully complete negative instructions or commands in every single situation or sentence formation, right? And that's hard for adults because it leads to thoughts of, but I just told you not to do that. So, one thing that brought this story or this concept home to me, I'm going to tell you a story. I hope it will do the same for you. I was paired with a lovely woman who was nearing retirement when I was a young teacher. It was a nice pairing. She was very calm, and I was new, young, and not so calm, right? And she was a child in the 1930s. So, you want to keep that in mind as I tell the story. When she learned to do a cartwheel, she wanted to show her favorite person in the world, her grandfather. And so the next time they went to her grandparents' house, she ran up to her grandfather excitedly and said, "Come outside. I want to show you. I learned how to do a cartwheel." And she went running for the front door. And he called after her, "Just don't do it on the sidewalk." She went sidewalk and turned a cartwheel triumphantly. And he was furious. He was convinced that she had, on purpose, disobeyed his instruction. So much so, 1930s, remember, he spanked her. And telling me this story so many years later, she's still got tears in her eyes. It was obviously a emotional touchstone for her in terms of how to speak and listen and talk with children. The solution to this is to use positive phrasing whenever possible. Positive phrasing is teaching by teaching because you're focusing on what to do. It increases the ability to follow instructions. It reduces the possibility of misunderstandings. Using negative statements adds a difficulty level for learners that you're concerned about because it means they have to translate that negative statement, like don't do it on the sidewalk, into a positive action like do it on the grass. Those are two really different things, right? Positive phrasing meets children where they are developmentally. That's going to be true for our youngest language learners, for multilingual learners, for children with a wide variety of delays or disabilities that interfere with auditory processing, language comprehension, attention, self-control, working memory, and probably a bunch of others that I didn't list there. So, positive phrasing is a powerful tool for children of all ages. And you can see that, I think, in the examples on this slide. The negative statements on the left are focused on the reactive behavior. But the positive statements on the right focus instead on the behavior you hope to see, the behavior you are teaching. And it means that learners that you're concerned about don't have to translate that negative instruction into a really different positive action. And while that translation seems intuitive to us as adults, it may not yet be so for the child. Remember, children react with the skills they currently have mastered. So, again, I thought we could I was trying to stay within my time limit, use the remaining time to open it up to questions or comments. Does anybody out there have any comments or questions?
And if you have a question that might take a little more explanation, come off mute and we'd love to hear from you. From Ashley, she says, this is why she likes positive discipline. And Joy says that she liked this seminar, especially the last part about being mindful of phrasing things with positive for children. I do think that's so important, Pamela. That's such a, I hadn't really thought about the cognitive energy that it might take for a child to translate that message into, new information, right? If we say stop running, does that mean skipping or crawling or galloping or, how will they know the expectations? So that's really important.
Yeah, and I often use that same concept in the classroom for children when they yelled stop at peers.
Mm.
I would say to them, stop isn't enough information. I was thinking what made me think of it was you say skipping or hopping, because I would say things like, do you want them to stop walking? Do you want them to stop talking? Do you want them not to wear that shirt again? No, I want them to stop X, Y, and Z. Oh, that's really helpful. Now we know what you're thinking about. Now we know what to stop. Okay, if you want her to stop, let's think about what she should do instead. Can you think of a way to tell her what you want her to do? I want her to sit down and not touch me. Oh, wow, that's really helpful. Thank you for phrasing it in a way that we know what we can do. So it
Right.
became kind of a talking point in helping children work through thinking about that immediate outburst, which is stop it, to beginning to try to transition into a piece of conversation that helps maybe in a more positive way express
Yes.
what they want.
Yes, it's so important.
Can,
Um,
can I just jump in to
yeah,
ask a question? I'm sorry, I'm
yes,
driving, so I couldn't
thank
turn on my
you.
video. Thank you so much, Pamela. This was fantastic. One of the my immediate thought when you talked about tantrums versus meltdowns went to this particular child in one of my teacher's classrooms who um, was struggling with certain developmental delays. Nothing was diagnosed at this child is 4 years old. Part of the part of the challenge for the classroom teachers with this child was the parents acknowledged that there were hardly any boundaries at home. So hearing no was extremely unsettling for this child. Well, when I say no, hearing a redirection rather. So a combination of tantrums, there is a nurture element that plays a role there, and also the developmental delays. So the tantrums quite often led to, as you said, meltdown, but the speed at which that happened was quite disruptive in the classroom. How would you approach this with the parents? And I just want to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, parent education, of course, is always a big part of what we do. And I think when I approach talking to parents, I always want to come with some solutions, the things that I'm doing at school that are working on the same problem. Because the last thing a parent needs is for you to come to a meeting and say, hey, your kid's having this problem, and what are you going to do about it? Right. So you always want to come with some observations, of course. You want to come with some solutions that you are implementing in the classroom, and that helps connect you to the parent because the parent knows that you're invested in this child's success. So you want to bring those things that you're doing and any progress that you're seeing. So we've noticed that when she's upset, if we try to help her calm down, it doesn't seem to work. And so we're letting her sit aside, know that she can come and sit with us at any moment. And she seems to calm down quicker when we do that than when we try to calm her down. What happens at home when your child gets upset? So you can kind of begin those conversations and begin talking about, setting limits, asking those kinds of questions. In school, there are a few limits that we have that all the children follow. Let's understand any limits that you might have at home. So I think it's always important to come with some answers or some solutions, some examples of what you're doing. I think that helps put you and parents, and you're not going to solve everything in the first meeting. So kind of pick the biggest thing to start with, maybe. And just like the child, you want to begin where the parent is. If they're not setting boundaries, they probably need help with that. And you're not going to change them into a different parent after one meeting. So understanding that little tiny baby steps are probably going to be a part of that. And maybe offering some resources, some websites or parenting courses that you do at the school, or parenting courses that you are acquainted with in your community, parent groups that might be supportful for the parent as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
So such good ideas, Pamela. Thank you. And in the chat, we see, let's see, a comment about an appreciation for the part about when a child is having a tantrum to be mindful of tone. Bill says, say what you want, emphasizing what it is that we want. Carol says it's such an important point that just because a child isn't looking at you doesn't mean they aren't listening. And I really appreciated that, bringing that awareness to the front about the visual input. It may be overload for the child, so looking away may help them actually focus.
It's that exercise where you sit and stare in someone's eyes deeply and talk to them.
Yes,
And how
yes,
that begins to be for you as an adult, that feeling for many of our learners comes much earlier and is
sure,
much stronger. So that looking away, it gets to the point where you just hardly cannot do it. And that's what
right.
happens for children. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and this person goes on to add how unproductive it is to say, "Look at me when I'm talking to you." That can really intensify the emotions too for the child, and we know that fight or flight or freeze, if that emotional overload is so great that they're not able to rationally think through the situation. And
And
Kat
that unfortunately is kind of a little bit of a hard habit to break because it often comes out
is.
of our mouths when we're a little dysregulated. You know, they're
Sure.
starting to be upset too. And so you have to catch yourself. It's one of those things that you kind of have to work hard at if it's something that you say frequently. It's going to come out at times before you realize it. I'm sorry, what's the next thing?
No, that's a really good point, Pamela. Kat says, about the pause, my coworker was also trained in 0 to 3. She has reminded us to always pause and count to 30 silently after asking a child a question or making a request. It's hard to do, but so helpful. And Kat is expressing her gratitude for you bringing that up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Kat. You know, it's when you think about children and their sensory systems and how they process information, if they're processing information slower, it's almost like their sensory system development is a little bit delayed. We would consider that normal for an infant or a toddler. But when you've got a 4-year-old that's doing it, that, is an indication to you. It feels different because it's not the rate that the peers might be responding at. And so that's a great time to go to those toddler teachers and say, what do you do? How long do you wait? To get those kind of tips, because often the group below you has encountered that behavior because within their group it's typical. It's what's going on all the time. I think this is a great example of that. So and then being able to, the other thing that I often advocate for doing that I didn't put in is waiting as you're working with children until they look at you, because often children, when they're done thinking, they're done thinking about it and trying to solve the problem, when they need help, before they start talking, they'll look at you. And I would
Mm,
often offer help even before they had to ask for it. The visual cue of making eye contact with me was enough to say, would you like some help? So that they didn't have to continually ask for help on the
mhm,
stamp game, ask for help on this, that, or the other thing. So that eye contact became a moment for me to smile and make
mhm,
warm contact and ask if they wanted help or offer help.
right. Pam, we have Ashley asking a question. She's she says, "How would you manage a child who is having a meltdown that is destroying the classroom or running out of the classroom?"
Had both of those. For a child who is like, I had a little boy who would clear shelves with their hand, would walk across and clear shelves. Let's see if I can get out of this for a minute. Oops. Stop share. That's what I need. Okay. Um, and Hmm. Now how to get rid of this screen. There we go. And so this is little boy would clear shelves. So my assistant, I had a wonderful co-teacher. I'd had her forever and ever and ever. And honestly, we traded the little boy back and forth. He would have freedom in the classroom until that moment where you could see it was coming or he was starting to clear the shelf. One would gather, one would help, put things back together. And then literally, because I taught primary, we carried him for a little bit to kind of help him get re-regulated. And we just kind of passed him back and forth until he developed more skills. For one of the little boys I had who did that, his progress came much more quickly than the other one. For the other one, we had other things that medical interventions that had to be a piece of it. But for one little boy, just holding him close and that kind of warm, comforting moment helped him to kind of
Mhm.
re-regulate. Then you could put him down for a little bit. He would work for a while until something happened. But we always kind of had eyes on for a good portion of the beginning of the year when this little one started.
And then I think you bring up a really good point is the observation piece. Knowing when you start to see maybe that a behavior is escalating or that, observing patterns of behavior. If there's a certain time of day or a certain material or something going on in the classroom that might be a pattern of behavior, you can start to anticipate those. It sounds like you had kind of that system going in your
We
classroom. You're starting to anticipate those behaviors.
We definitely did. And the first one was definitely didn't have very much language. And so we had a big emphasis on teaching
Mhm.
language.
Sure.
Language and reactive behavior, go together. The more language that
Mhm.
you have, the automatically you reduce reactive behavior. You don't have to do anything else but teach language, and reactive behavior is going to go down. And so as he gained more language, that reactive behavior did begin to go down, but that wasn't the only thing we're doing. But certainly every time we were holding him, we were talking about in very simple words and phrases
Mhm.
what was going on around him so that he was gaining more and more ability to interact and speak.
That's wonderful. Diana is asking, she says, how can I talk to a student who used incorrect behavior to mock others and constantly repeats inappropriate actions to get attention? She's
Mhm.
tried art, other strategies, and also encouraged their leadership skills, but they're disruptive all the time. It sounds like that may be a little older child.
How old is, yeah, I was going to say, how old is the
It
child?
doesn't say the age. Um,
Child is 6 years.
6. Okay. So primary age. Is he in a primary classroom?
Yes.
6. Okay.
Okay, so I have in the last chapter of my book a whole section that is exactly that little person, someone who is using negative attention, negative interaction to gain attention. This is probably a child who doesn't get enough attention. It's important to figure out what that reactive behavior is communicating. And so I developed a series of little grace and courtesy lessons that I called social errands. We sent out this little boy who did the exact same thing on closely monitored little errands into the classroom to first learn how to observe because he was new to the Montessori environment as a 6-year-old. He didn't know what observation in Montessori was all about. Then to gather information, return to the teacher, that return to the teacher and give the teacher information, gave the teacher time to talk about the skills that were targeted by the little social errand that was his. We did this for about 10 minutes a day, based on grace and courtesy style lessons for that age child, about 10 minutes a day, every day for several weeks, gradually increasing the number of social errands and the number of children that he was interacting with as he showed mastery of each little step. So basically, we took what was how are his peers gaining attention and broke that down into little tiny steps and taught each step and supported him through those. And as he began to gain attention in more positive means, he began to stay a little longer than he needed to get the information on that social errand. So in chapter 11 of my book, that whole thing is basically laid out step by step. But basically what we did was thank you, Braintree people. um, so basically,
We have a fan of the book.
yes, yes, those are some of my former coworkers in Kansas. That's why I said I knew where 2 of those people were located anyway. That chapter 11 of my book lays that out step by step, and basically social errands is what I called it. And it's basically what you want to do is teach him better ways, a replacement skill. You want to give him better ways to gain that attention that he is craving.
Mhm. Amanda comments, whenever I'm having a difficult time getting through to a child who is upset, I always repeat to myself, they're not giving me a hard time, they're having a hard time. Her, it helps ground her and regulate her nervous system. Oh, that's so lovely, Amanda. Thank you for that reminder.
Great
And
suggestion.
yeah, and Pamela, Lisa has a question for you. After decades of time in the Montessori realm, I have personally observed a greater uptick of anxious, unfocused, and emotional behavior. What is your opinion of the greater frequency? Is it purely anecdotal or part of a greater shift? Are children today the same as 100 years ago? From Callie.
Hi, Callie and Lisa. Well, I have to say, even when I was a young teacher and you would go to conferences and people were saying kids today are just different than they were 20 years ago. So that feeling, I think, for teachers has been going on for a long time. However, I do think that it really is true today. I think there are a lot of factors that contributed to that. COVID was, and the social isolation that occurred for kids during that time is still having lasting effects. Certainly, there are more children being identified with neurodivergent kinds of patterns of behavior and thinking and being. And so I do think for whatever reason, there are more children who are struggling with that sort of thing. So I do agree that it is increasing. But I also think there's a wealth of knowledge and people who are committed to this and people who are working towards finding solutions right now. So on one hand, I find it, a little bit troubling, but on the other hand, I'm really excited to see the growth in education, certainly in Montessori education, in learning how to help these learners become successful, productive members of our classroom communities and their society as a whole as they age.
Well, Pamela, this has been such a delight to spend time with you this evening and to learn from all of your years of wisdom and successful teaching experience. I know you've changed the lives of so many children and families, and there's great information in your book. I hope, I would just encourage everyone to get a copy.
Let me throw that
And
slide back up, Lindsay, because I think it has the QR code that I was supposed to be sharing at the
oh,
end.
yes. Thank you. And as we conclude, just a reminder in the chat, you will find the email address for Ellen Lastinger, our Director of Admissions. The email info@sarasotauniversity.edu. Again, all of our programs are completely online. There is not an in-person residency required. All of our programs are completely online, so you can enroll and study from anywhere around the world. Be sure to order your book, written by Pamela Shanks. There it is, The Montessori Approach. We'd love to talk to you about any of our degree programs. Just email info@sarasotauniversity.edu. We'd love to talk to you. And if you'd like to receive a certificate of attendance for being here this evening, please scan the code. Uh-oh, I see somebody saying the code is not working. I'm so sorry. It is up right now. And if it if you're having trouble with the code, we will also email it out to you
We will email.
tomorrow morning. We will contact everyone who was here tonight. You'll receive an email thanking you for your attendance, and you will have an opportunity to click on the link. Pamela is providing her email here at PamelaBShanks@gmail.com, or find her on LinkedIn. Montessori Classroom-Based Interventions for Educators, Service Providers, and Families. And again, Pamela, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us this evening and your wisdom. It's truly been a delight to be here with you this evening.
Well, and
And thank
again,
you, everyone.
I know at the end of a long, busy day, it's hard to get online and listen. So I appreciate everybody attending. If you have further questions or things that you didn't want to talk about online, please do reach out and contact me. I'm always available to help. Thank you so much to Sarasota University, and thanks to everyone here.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening and hope to see you next month. Remember, we meet on the third Tuesday of every month at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 o'clock Central. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.